Welcome from the deep. I am Mike the Finder.
And I am Book of Brett.
And today we are talking about the 2021 film from Wes Anderson, The French Dispatch.
Which is why I look like I'm being interrogated.
So do you want to go ahead and say what the hell is going on with your webcam here real quick so we can all move past it in our brains?
Yes, let's do that real quick. So today I received the Sony a7S III, which I'm very, very excited about. This is actually the first thing it's being used on. And as a result, the awful colors of the room I'm currently in came out even more vividly when I decided to blast a 120D aperture light onto the wall, and everything came out green. So now I have a 120D with a dome on it that far from my face. It's right there. The light's right there. And so it's also the only light I have in here. And so the combination of it being close to my face, above my face, and not accompanied by anything else on my face makes it look like I'm about to start singing Radiohead covers. So
yes, it's very moody and very yes. So that's what's going on there. Hopefully we can all now focus on the topic at hand, which is the newest Wes Anderson movie. This is something I've had my eye on for a while, and Brett, as you know, Wes Anderson is one of my favorite directors.
Yes.
So when this came out, I usually try to see them in theaters when I can, but this is one of those movies that got pushed and kind of put on the back burner a little bit for theaters and stuff like that, because of the whole pandemic and all that stuff. It's one of those movies that got shifted around. So I think, I think originally, I could be wrong about this, somebody correct me if I'm wrong, but I think originally this movie was supposed to come out in 2019.
Oh wow, so it really got pushed.
And so it got pushed, or no, it was 2020, not 2019. Okay. My mistake. And it got pushed until last year, because Wes Anderson movies tend to do really well, and it makes sense why they would want to hang on to that and put it into theater if at all possible. So if we look at the IMDb page for this, it actually says now playing in theaters everywhere right now. That's what it says. Look at your screen. That's what it says right there.
That seems like an IMDb thing.
I don't know what that means. There's no way this is still in theaters, right? This is from last year.
I doubt it.
There's no way.
I don't know, man. They did they actually did pretty well on their budget, like against their budget. I think they're at because it was a $15 million budget, and I can't remember exactly how much it had made so far, but it had actually been doing really well against the budget that it was made on. So I mean, I don't know, maybe they did a re-release of it. They re-released what was that? What was that god awful Jared Leto thing that came out recently? That superhero movie that Jared Leto was in?
Morbius.
Morbius. That thing was just shit from the get-go, and then that got a re-release. So let's give this one a re-release. I think this one is probably more deserving of it than Morbius.
So, according to Google here, this is just a quick Google. The budget on this was $25 million, and the box office
15. Okay.
The box office did $46.3 million. So, all in all, not staggering numbers, but this is not a giant comic book movie. I think
and his movies never go into like insane amounts of money either.
And I think that's important to keep in context whenever we're talking about a Wes Anderson movie doing well. It does not mean it's going to make $450 million worldwide. No. Because this is just by the very nature of it being a Wes Anderson movie, it is aimed at a much smaller audience in general, I think.
Right.
So, as always, do you want to go ahead and give us a quick synopsis of this movie here real quick? Also, before we get started here, I am just getting over COVID here. So there's going to be a lot of coughing and sounding weird on my end today. Hopefully by the next time we record, I will be feeling better. But but that's what's going on with me. So give us a quick synopsis here real quick as we get started, and we will talk about this.
Yeah, so The French Dispatch is what Wes Anderson described as his homage or love story to journalism and journalists. And it's an anthology series that's kind of based around stories from a newspaper called The French Dispatch. And I think that's probably the most concise way of putting it without getting into the detail of every single story.
I think part of what makes this movie work so well is the fact that it is an anthology. Which I purposely, whenever I'm really excited about something, whether it be a video game or a movie, I try to stay away from as much material about it as possible before seeing it. And this movie is one of those that I did no research. I watched the trailer once when it first came out, which I do think was 2019, or maybe it was early 2021.
It was a while ago, because I remember you talking to me.
It was a long time ago, yes.
Yeah.
And I did watch the trailer one time, but that was the only thing I had going in. And by the time I actually watched this the other day, I'd forgotten everything that I had seen in that trailer anyway, other than it's black and white and it's very artsy and Wes Anderson-like. So with all that being said, let's just go ahead and start off with our overall feelings about this, and then we'll get into specifics. So what are your overall thoughts on The French Dispatch?
Although I did like it, I would say this is probably my least favorite Wes Anderson movie so far.
Wow.
I did like it. I want to make that clear. I did like it. But anthology movies in general, I'm real wishy-washy about. I either like them or I don't, and so this is the first one where like I enjoyed it because it had the Wes Anderson aesthetic. But I especially, I will say this, by the last story, which I think is the one where with Edward Norton. By that story, I actually found myself getting bored in that one. I was actually bored by that point. I feel like it went on. The movie felt longer than it was to me, and I think a lot of that is just because it's the anthology series, and there isn't a lot of time to like really invest in a lot of the characters from my end, not from the. Other end, but
it is nearly 2 hours. It's an hour 47. So
but an hour 47. That's really not that uncommon.
That's true.
And so
that's true.
Like I said, it's I liked it, but I wasn't crazy about the anthology aspect of it. I gotta say, I really, really, really admire his ability to write a movie in the style of the old like beatnik and post-beatnik journalists. Because I got into there was a time where I was like really into like Hunter S. Thompson and all those guys, and so like to see him or to see him be able to change up his writing style like that, like it's one thing to be able to change up a directing style or a camera style or a lighting style, but to change up a writing style, that's pretty goddamn impressive. Changing up your writing style is I'm not a writer, but even as not a writer, I can imagine that trying to do that and then doing it successfully is gotta be pretty goddamn hard.
Yeah. So I mean, I totally agree with you. One of the things that stuck out of my brain while I was watching this is I can really tell he really enjoys those movies. And you can tell he really did his homework, and I mean everything from the music to what the streets look like to his writing. You can tell he really, really went all in on researching and watching movies from that era and just trying to really recreate that style, which is not something that I think most Americans are very familiar with in general, which may be the reason that this is kind of off-putting.
Right.
My overall thoughts is I liked this a lot. And I knew I would.
I figured you were going to.
I knew I would, because this is this is right up my alley. This is like super artsy. It's very, for lack of a better word, pretentious.
It's the most pretentious movie I've seen from him.
It's for sure the most pretentious movie he's ever made. And on how do I say this? On one hand, that is a very good thing, because you can tell he's really stretching his muscles here and really trying to do everything that he wants to do. This is not bad. You can tell this is not bound by what the studio wanted him to make. This is the movie. You can just tell by watching it. This is the movie he wanted to make.
And let's be clear. Wes Anderson is a pretentious prick. Like,
well, I mean, I don't know about the prick part, but he's definitely pretentious.
No, I don't mean like a prick in a derogatory way. I mean it as in just a word that I threw in there. But if you watch like interviews with him and everything, he's incredibly pretentious.
But the thing is I've always got the vibe from him that it is not an act and that is genuinely who he is. Whereas somebody like Tom York, I feel like is that's a character. Wes Anderson is pretentious to be pretentious, but I also feel like it comes from a genuine place. Now, with that being said, on one hand, it's a very good thing that he made this movie is pretentious and this is the movie he wanted to make. On the other hand, this almost feels like a parody of a Wes Anderson movie. Like, it's too Wes Anderson-like. I never thought I'd say that I like this, but it's too pretentious. It's too up its own ass. And I never thought I'd say that like about a Wes Anderson movie, that it's like too pretentious, because that's his whole thing. But at a certain point, when does making a Wes Anderson style movie become making a parody of what a Wes Anderson movie should be? And it's this weird line where I feel like The Life Aquatic rides that line perfectly, where it is his style and it's not hyper pretentious. This is, it's black and white. It's shot the way we were saying earlier about the old beatnik 60s style French movies and French Revolutionary type stuff. And it all adds up to maybe just being a little too pretentious.
Too much?
It's too much.
You're not wrong. It's incredibly pretentious. But I don't know if that's him doing it on purpose to replicate his style, because especially like with the French Revolutionary characters, they're all incredibly pretentious people. Like all those characters are insufferably pretentious, except for the older lady.
But that's also part of the joke, right? Like, right. It's done that way on purpose to sort of not only poke fun at that, but it also plays into the whole theme of the movie.
I think that specifically plays really well in that story, though, because it also shows it kind of undercuts the idea of like the whole I'm young and I've got the world figured out kind of thing until you really do have it figured out. Right. And so it's that kind of like naive confidence, and I feel like the pretentiousness for that really, really underscores that aspect of that story.
I agree. And part of the pretentiousness that is this movie is the subject matter, right? You really get a sense for this. My favorite part of this anthology was the very first story, and I feel like it kind of tapers from there. Yeah. And which is I think the main reason when you say I started to lose interest toward the end. I think now. Tell me what you think about this. I think the reason that whole thing with Edward Norton at the end is because it has the most action, and it has the most like typical Act 3 sort of peak and valley. But I think the first one with Benicio, how do you say his name? What is it?
Benicio del Toro.
Benicio del Toro. Thank you.
Well, that's not technically the first one. The first one is technically the one with Owen Wilson going through the city that they're in.
Right. That one,
that was my favorite.
Okay, that's fair. I'm talking about the artist one. I forgot that one was before. The painter one was the one for me where it was. For me, that was my favorite because it's the perfect mesh of pretentious art thing mixed with pretentious Wes Anderson art thing. And
sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is I think the pretentiousness works well for that one.
Yes.
The same way that it does in what was it? Velvet Chainsaw, I think is what it's called, and where it's basically making fun of the pretentiousness of the arts or the painters society, the artistic societies that are out there. And I think it worked really, really well for that one.
Well, and that goes back to it's part of the joke, right?
Right.
Like that's it's what it's saying. The problem is this one with Edward Norton and stuff, that's not part of it, but it's still shot in a way like it is.
Right.
Like I kind of almost feel like the way it's shot kind of does a disservice to the story that they're telling in that specific instance. Whereas the other ones, like the one with Owen Wilson, the pretentious Wes Anderson-ness of all of it works. And it makes sense in the context of that story. Whereas the last one, it doesn't so much.
Well, not only that, man, that first one with Owen Wilson, it's not that every scene in all the stories in all of his movies doesn't like flow into the other really well, but everything in that first story, first of all, fuck Wes Anderson for his ability to block a fucking scene.
Oh my God, dude, yes.
Asshole, dude, Jesus Christ. I'm watching this first one and I'm just like, this is really good.
He fills frames perfectly, and he does it. He does it in this way that's layered really nicely as well.
It's layered nicely. The movement from one side of the screen to the other, the way things move, the way the movements of things relate to the movements of other subjects.
Yes.
Excuse me. On the screen, I feel like the first story is the most Wes Anderson story in this entire movie.
For sure.
I felt.
For sure.
Simply because it just has that vibe. And I think the reason why I like the first one so much is because it feels like a continuation of the introduction. Because really what we get is the introduction of what the French Dispatch is. And then that bleeds seamlessly into Owen Wilson's segment because it's happening with the because we basically get the French Dispatch, we get an introduction to the newspaper, and then it blends seamlessly into the same visual style and happening in the city and the things going on in the city, and it's a current story within the movie. Everything else is very much like this happened before.
Well, it's also why everything is in black and white, because if you notice, like when everything is in black and white, it's somebody telling a story, versus whenever something is in real time or more recent, it's in color. So
right.
I think what impressed me the most about it is it's the perfect way to sort of introduce the city as part of this movie. Because like you said, it's kind of a continuation of the intro, but with that being the very first thing that we see, it really sets the tone of what the rest of the movie is going to be, and it does it in a way that is, I think you're right. It's not only the most Wes Anderson thing in this movie, but it might be the best shot too, because
100 absolutely
the
I think
framing and the layering within the framing and the way he uses colors and the way he uses extras and it's just all of it is beautiful. It's smart. It's smart. It's charming. It's beautiful. Yeah. It's just perfect.
It's also the segment where I called you and I went, Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
Wes Anderson and his ability and his filming abilities, because I mean, granted, a lot of it's got to do with the cinematographer too, but the way things are happening on screen is that's directing. And the way he just that was the segment where I called you and I said that because it was just like, dude, this guy, like, what a dick. Well, what a dick. And that's why I said, like, even though this is my least favorite Wes Anderson movie that I've seen, I still enjoyed it. But I also, like I told you, like I said, the whole anthology aspect threw me for a loop. I didn't know that going into this, that it was an anthology movie.
Me neither.
And that threw me for a loop. And I think it's because you always come to expect a cohesive story from beginning to end from him. And that's actually what I like about movies that are anthology based. But even then, man, like I still enjoyed it. I still liked it. It was just by the end of it, I was kind of like, this is an hour 47, right?
I think the anthology thing works really well, personally. And as I was watching it, I was thinking, this is a cool way for him to sort of expand his wings a little bit, because we don't see him do animation, for example. We've never seen him do 2D animation like that in anything. He's done claymation, and there are moments of claymation in this. But like, he gets to go on this extended 2D animation thing and really like flex what he can do in other mediums. But I think that's why it works for me as an anthology, because he really gets to play with a bunch of different ideas. And what I will say about the anthology is I actually think the wraparounds with Bill Murray and everything are kind of the weakest thing in this movie. Like he didn't spend enough time writing the overall story that's going to be told. And by the end of it, I kind of felt like, why did I need to be told this? Like, usually there's a very large feeling of like, I learned something, or this said something about family or something like that. Whereas this, I was kind of left thinking like, what was the point of this other than to be super artsy and pretentious?
I think it's more of like a framing device than like a strong story element.
Well, yes, but what makes a good anthology is when the wraparound can tell as good of a story. Trick or Treat is a good example of this, where the wraparound and everything that's happening in the overworld, for lack of a better term, to use an MMO term, everything that's happening in the overworld is as interesting as the stories that are being told in the anthology itself. And I just felt like, for me, as somebody who does like anthologies and likes what was the Mortuary Collection? I don't know if you've seen that.
I know of it though.
That's a fantastic example of the overall story being as good as the stories that they're telling. It's interesting and it unfolds in an interesting way throughout it. Whereas this, like, I understand it's a good framing device for telling the stories he wants to tell, but that's all that it is. And that's the biggest issue I had with it being an anthology.
I mean, you're not going to get much argument out of me for that. I could always use more Bill Murray in my life.
Yeah, for sure, right? I mean, he was very underutilized in this. Now, at the same time, if he was in this, I probably would have been like, Bill Murray again. But, that's just how my brain works.
Just be happy, Mike.
Yeah. Now, you touched on the cinematographer, and the cinematographer is the same guy that he's been using since Rushmore, Robert Yauman.
Just like his production designer.
He has done so many things. If we look here, French Dispatch. He also did the 2016 Ghostbusters, Love and Mercy. He did Grand Budapest, Moonrise Kingdom. He did Bridesmaids, Whip It.
He did Bridesmaids?
He did. He was the DP of Bridesmaids, yeah. He also did Yes Man, Darjeeling Limited. He also did Dogma. He also did Bottle Rocket, and like the list keeps going on. Drugstore Cowboy. This guy has done a ton of stuff, and I know that Wes Anderson, he really likes working with all the same people, and I think that one of my favorite things that Wes Anderson does is whip pans, zooms, and dolly shots. And when he nails all three of those, especially those freeze frames, right? When he's got everybody frozen and he's like panning across stuff, dude, it's beautiful. And you're right. A lot of it is directing, but a huge thumbs up needs to go to Robert Yauman, because the cinematography in this movie is insane. It's insane.
Yeah, it is.
As well as the lighting. I don't know if you noticed, but there are so many old school horror lighting moments in this, especially in the black and white parts, that it's just, I don't know. It's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful.
You see that a lot in the segment with Benicio del Toro. There's a lot of that in there.
Yes. Especially,
I think that's just because Benicio del Toro's face, lends itself to that.
Yeah, it does.
And I forgot Benicio del Toro was in this, so when it came to his segment, I was actually really stoked because I really like Benicio del Toro.
I do too. Yeah.
The first time I ever saw him in anything was in Snatch, and I went, I want to watch your movies.
He was so good in Snatch.
He's amazing in Snatch.
Okay, is there anything specific you would like to get into before we move on here?
Not really. The biggest issue I had with anything, in regards to specifics was the anthology aspect, because I think that also bleeds over into my aforementioned feelings on the whole thing overall. I would like to know what your least favorite segment was.
My least favorite segment, to be honest, is the French Revolutionary stuff. I think if I was 10 years younger, I would have liked that a lot more because it would have very much spoke to my sensibilities back then.
Right.
But now, as somebody who's closer to 40 than they are 20, it's a little too pie in the sky, love conquers all horse. For me, it was a little too, like, even for a Wes Anderson movie, it was a little too positive and quirky. And I also don't really like Timothy Chalamet, or what's his name? I always mess up his name.
Chalamet. I think it's Chalamet.
I liked him in Dune. I don't know if you've seen the new Dune. He's good.
No.
He's good in the new Dune.
I keep meaning to, though.
Arguably, a much better performance out of him in Dune than it is here. But I also think that's probably what Wes Anderson wanted, kind of a dry performance from him. Otherwise, he wouldn't have chose him for this.
Right.
But for me, he's just not a great actor. And I generally, when I see him in stuff, this is a me thing. I typically tend to roll my eyes whenever he's in stuff because I just don't like him that much. But he's okay in this, but that's by far my least favorite thing. It's shot beautifully, and
yeah.
I just thought it was boring. It was just too dialogue heavy to be in the middle. It maybe would have done better at the beginning. I don't know.
Yeah, I gotta say, actually, that was probably my least favorite. That one was probably my least favorite. I don't know if it's for the same reasons, but simply because I didn't care about that story as
At
much,
all,
or
right?
I wasn't into that story the way I was into the other ones. Like the last one, even with the last one, I was kind of like checking out a little bit. I really liked the way that one was written because that one feels the most to me that it was written by one of the old beatnik writers. The way that one is written, it's written nearly in poetic prose. It reads more like a really flowery old school beatnik novel versus a publication or a newspaper entry. And so that I really, really liked. I also really like Liev Schreiber, so it's cool to see him in here.
Yeah.
But the French Revolution one was the one where I was just like, I don't care.
Yeah.
I don't care.
Yeah.
Like, that was kind of how I felt about it. And I don't know why. But yeah, I would say that one was probably my least favorite.
Well, I think more than anything, he's really good at kind of creating his own universe. And making you feel like you're kind of peeking through this window of an otherwise unknown place. Right. And the way he lets you peek through that window is always beautiful. The way he uses color to draw your eye to different places. A lot of that's not in here because it is black and white. But it does still kind of work. What was really interesting for me was the aspect ratio. I don't know if you noticed this while you were watching it.
That. Yeah.
The way he uses, especially at the end, even the one with Benicio del Toro when he's bribing people, the entire movie shifts to the right so that they can show on the left him paying bribes out. And it's just this really interesting thing, because at the beginning I was like, it's weird that he chose this aspect ratio. I mean, I get kind of it's for the aesthetic that he's going for, but then he breaks out of it in specific scenes, and it's really interesting. And it's not something you see very often.
Right. Yeah, that was one of the first things I noticed, actually, was the aspect ratio.
Yeah.
And I noticed it shifting in the Benicio del Toro one, where he switches from 4:3 to 16:9.
Right.
To show the mosaic, or what I don't know. I can't remember what they called it, because I don't give a shit about painting. But there's a name for it, where there's like multiples in a row like that. I did notice that. I thought it was really interesting. I will say, when I noticed the 4:3 ratio, I was like, okay, I like it. And then I was kind of like, you just did that to do it. But then the longer I watched the Owen Wilson one, the more I went, these scenes don't work the same in widescreen or 16:9. They don't work that way. Like, the whole aesthetic not the whole aesthetic works because of it, but just those two black bars on the side alone add to the whole thing, which was really cool when you think about it. There's all this work and all this effort put into what's happening on camera, and then all of it has a different vibe with just two black bars on the side.
Well, I think a huge part of that is his framing, because he framed stuff differently because he knew he was going to do that versus something like Grand Budapest.
And that, boys and girls, is why you storyboard.
And I got to tell you, man, I was kind of like, I kind of felt the same way at the beginning, where I was like, okay, you did this because you want to be different. And like, you know what I mean? Like, you're so up your own ass.
The Lighthouse, Wes, we get it.
Yeah, you're so up your own ass that you had to be different enough because this looks old and stuff like that. But by the end, the way he had used it and the way he shifts stuff around, it really works. This very easily could have been super HD 4K, kind of almost the way
easily.
Grand Budapest is, where everything is super over the top in color, and like the whole thing just feels new. And he kind of went against the grain, and I was not sure I was going to like that. But the fact that he does that, you mix that with large portions of this are in black and white, which I'm a huge sucker for. You make stuff black and white, it not only makes it moodier, but then you use it as part of the story that you're telling. It's smart. Like, it's just it's just good filmmaking is what it is.
Right.
Now, one thing that I did want to touch on, was the CGI and practical effects are so, like, for instance, the part where she sticks the thing in the wheelchair spokes and he goes flying. It's perfect. It's so subtle. It doesn't ruin. I could not tell if it was CGI or if it was sped up practical effects. And I think
the only reason I knew that was CGI is because of the way her body reacts to
is
the
that
impact.
what it? Because it happens so quickly.
It's because that's why I knew, because like you got to think about how fast those spokes are spinning.
Yeah.
When she sticks her hand down, her body doesn't like pull with it. You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah.
And so
she just sticks it kind of like she's in a superhero movie. Yeah.
That's how I could tell it was CGI'd. But again, it's not CGI'd in a specific. I guess a better way of putting it is it's green screened. Because it's not. Yeah. It's not computer graphics. It's just.
But that's a running.
You can tell it didn't happen at the same time.
That's a running theme in this movie, though, is that he does use his typical claymation stuff in here as well, but it's used in a way that sort of accents the entire vibe of the movie and not in a way that takes away from it. Like, and I keep using this example because we did this on the channel, The Unholy. The Unholy's practical effects take you out of that movie in a way that is.
Abrasive.
Yes, abrasive is a good word for it. Yes, because it's like that. It doesn't match the tone of the rest of the movie. This is a good example of using practical effects, but in a way that accents the entire tone of the movie and doesn't hurt it.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
And then the only other thing I want to touch on here is when you have a certain style, it's really easy for you to get pigeonholed into doing the same thing over and over again. Now, Quentin Tarantino, for example, is somebody who has a very specific style. He has a very specific dialogue style, even at that. So does Wes Anderson, but somebody like Tarantino uses his style in different ways, right? And you can tell it's a Tarantino movie, but it's not him making the same movie over and over and over again, right?
Right.
What I walked away from this movie feeling like was Wes Anderson has run his course on making these kind of movies, and is it creative to be doing the same thing over and over and over again? Because at a certain point, Moonrise Kingdom is one of the most charming movies ever made. The French Dispatch, which is in his exact same style, less charming, still charming, but is it creative that 20 years ago he made things like Bottle Rocket and Rushmore and Life Aquatic? Is it still creative for him to be doing the exact same things in this movie? Because it almost feels like he's too much of a one-hit wonder in that way. Does that make sense?
I would say this. Yes.
So much so that it feels a parody of itself.
I mean, it's still creative. It is still creative, but in the sense of adapting that style to different stories.
But Tarantino does that in a way he's not making the same movie over and over again. Django is a very different movie than Reservoir Dogs.
It's true.
I'm not sure I can say The Life Aquatic is a very different movie from Grand Budapest, which is a very different movie from French Dispatch.
Right. No, I would say I would say that's true. I would say all of his movies do tend to have the same feel, and that might be because he uses the same people both behind and in front of the camera every time.
Yeah, as much as I like his zoom shots and his all of his, all the specific cinematography that he always uses, it's just over and over again.
Yeah, no, it is, but it's also why, like as talented as and great as Wes Anderson is, this is why I've never considered him like one of my favorite directors.
Right.
Simply because I do feel like it's kind of like watching Nicolas Cage. Like, yeah, or you know what? No, because I like Nicolas Cage. Let's go with an actor I'm not too crazy about. It's like Will Smith. Will Smith is one of those actors where it's like, yeah, this is his character's name, but he's still Will Smith as this character.
Seth Rogen's another good example of that.
Seth Rogen's a great example of that. Yeah, it always feels like... Careful. No, you're not wrong. And I really, really like Ryan Reynolds, but you're not wrong there at all. But that's kind of how it feels. It kind of feels like the filmmaker aspect or the directing equivalent of those aforementioned actors. Like that's how it feels to me, where it's like, yeah, this story's different. Yes, this setting is different, but it's still this style. Like not much has been adapted. Like the aesthetic has been adapted to the story, but not in any kind of way where the aesthetic changes the story or vice versa. You know what I mean?
But see, some of my favorite things from him are things like Fantastic Mr. Fox, where it's just a hard left turn. That movie is not like any of his other movies. It has the same sensibilities.
Right.
And a lot of the same like pan shots and stuff like that, for instance. But it's a different movie.
Isle of Dogs is a good example too.
Yes, Isle of Dogs is fantastic, and it's his sensibilities, but done with different type of material. This is just kind of more of the same.
Right.
Like it just feels like a continuation of stuff that he's been doing forever, which isn't necessarily a bad thing. But right. I want to see him evolve as a filmmaker, and I don't feel like he's evolving while very stylish. It's also very pretentious and very blasé and the same sort of thing that he's been doing for a while.
I would I'm going to agree, but I'm also going to play devil's advocate to the antithesis of your statement, which is I would argue that that's what a lot of people are coming to watch Wes Anderson movies for. This style, this directing style, this cinematography style, everything that you see in a Wes Anderson movie is what people are coming for. I don't think I don't think that's a problem until he's making that movie over and over and over again because of people expecting that from him.
But see, what you just said there is exactly how I feel about this. I feel like he's almost boxed himself in as like the quirky indie filmmaker guy, and that he almost feels like he has to do this stuff. Now, I don't know if that's true or not, but I do feel like this is the same thing. It's not a push in any hardcore direction other than it's black and white and they shot stuff slightly differently because of it.
No, you're not wrong. But again, I think that's that might be one of the reasons why, like, towards the end of the movie, I was kind of like, I don't want to say I was checking out, because that's how I feel, but I know that's not how it comes off, because it wasn't like going like, okay, I'm done. But I feel like by the end of it, I was like, I feel like I just watched another Wes Anderson movie.
Yeah.
Like, that's how I felt. Like, nothing about this stood out to me. Like, Life Aquatic hit me.
That's exactly what I was about to bring up. Yeah.
Life Aquatic is a great example. Like, Life Aquatic, when I watched Life Aquatic, like that hit me on a level. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Grand Budapest Hotel was another one where that hit me on a certain level. That one was because of the story involved, and a lot of it was because it was this original story. Everything was made up. Everything was original, and that's what I do have to say about this. Is it's still an original screenplay. So that's still impressive, but it didn't hit me the way the earlier movies I've watched from him hit me when I watched them.
I think part of that is what we were talking about before, where it's the very nature of anthologies, if not done correctly, can sort of leave you feeling like, okay, that was just sort of a bunch of stories stacked on top of each other. And for me, the entire thing left me, like I said before, feeling what was the point of all this? I think if the overworld, again, for lack of a better term, had more punch, we don't spend enough time with Bill Murray for me to really care that he dies, right? I mean, it's a bummer, but like, I don't know him as a character that well.
I wouldn't even call it a bummer. I wouldn't even call it a bummer. It's like, well, now, because they mentioned it at the beginning, and it's like, oh, well, it has to happen.
It didn't have any emotional punch because the overall story had no purpose. The only reason the French Dispatch as a story, not the individual stories that he's telling, but as an overall story delivering mechanism, it lacks emotional depth. Therefore, there's no reason for me to really care when I walk away from it. Like, for me, each one of those individual stories, they can be looked at as individual stories, and the painting one, that is what I walked away with from this movie. Like, that is a fantastic short film in and of itself. Even the Owen Wilson one, fantastic, but the overall thing lacked emotional depth the same way that most, if not all, of his other movies have, which is why it didn't work as well for me. This is by far my least favorite Wes Anderson movie I've seen so far, for sure.
See, I was really, really wondering if we were going to be in agreement with that, because as I was watching it, I was like, okay, I like Wes Anderson. Like, I really like Wes Anderson, but you really like Wes Anderson.
Yeah.
And so the things I was noticing, I was like, I honestly wondered if your enjoyment of Wes Anderson was going to convolute your perception of what was going on in the story. I
had gone into this thinking, well, this is going to be a fucking slam dunk, and I'm going to love this. I like all of his movies. Now, this may come as a shock to you, but I'm also not a huge fan of Grand Budapest. I think it's a good movie.
Really?
But it is far from his best movie, in my opinion. So, for me, he has been going his last several movies. Isle of Dogs was great, but his last 2 or 3 movies for me have been a little lackluster, and I think it's because of what I've been saying. It's just the same thing. Like he's not progressing as a storyteller. He's progressing in a way of like, look at how good all of this looks on screen. Like for sure, his visual storytelling is incredible. But I feel like his writing has gotten a little lackluster over the last few movies. And so for me, his earlier Life Aquatic, Darjeeling Limited, that era, the Royal Tenenbaums, that is his peak for me. And I think it probably always will be, unless he progresses in a way that is less foreseeable in the future, if that makes sense.
I think this is all kind of a combination of everything going on behind the camera. When you're using and in front of it, really, when you're using all the same people,
how can it not
for
look
everything
exactly the same? Yeah.
How could it not come out looking similar? Not only that, but you gotta understand, man, he writes, directs, and produces his own movies.
Yeah.
And I'm going to go out on a limb and say that there isn't a lot of room for suggestion with Wes Anderson on a set. I don't know that. So I'm not going to
You think that he writes stuff down as like, this is how it goes?
I think he exerts an incredible amount of control over everything from beginning to end. Which can be a good thing, but when you're not adapting the project to unknowns, as far as like willing to like branch out into something that's unfamiliar, I think that's why you end up with something that feels like very formulaic.
I mean, but that's the thing. It's like, I'm going to go back to Tarantino. He's so good at this, where he
Tarantino, Kubrick, Spielberg,
yes,
Coppola,
and for some reason, Wes Anderson just it's getting stale for me. Like his whole gimmick and his shtick is getting stale, and that is how I walked out of this movie feeling. There's greatness in this, but there's not enough emotional depth in any of it for me to really have walked away feeling like the whole thing is a cohesive piece that I enjoyed, whereas I can pick out stories that I really enjoyed, but what does that say about the whole thing as a film and not necessarily pieces of it?
Yeah. I would say at no point in this movie did I feel like invested in any of the characters.
Yeah. And again, for me, Benicio del Toro, he killed it, and for me that's the strongest. It's the strongest performance in this movie, and it has the most emotional depth to it while still retaining his style. So
I gotta say, just I know we're trying to steer away from going into specifics of movies, like specific scenes, but I love that when she's going through the slideshow and then that nude photo of her shows up and she's like, oh, that's me. Like, just so like, look, there I am. And then doesn't make it go away right away. Like, it just stays up there.
The best part about it is her confidence doesn't get shaken at all from the whole thing. She just moves on. Yeah, it's great.
I gotta say, I don't know this to be true, but I think this is the most nudity I've ever seen in a Wes Anderson movie.
For sure. I think so. There's definitely nudity in other movies of his, but for sure, yeah. All right, well, let's wrap this up. What are your final thoughts on this, and give me a rating?
Definitely worth seeing. If you have, I feel like if you have not seen a Wes Anderson movie, you're going to simultaneously you're going to enjoy it probably more than we did. Again, not that we didn't, but you're just probably going to enjoy it more. You also, and when I say simultaneously, because on that same note, you should not take this as what to expect from Wes Anderson. This doesn't feel like. It feels like Wes Anderson aesthetically, but story-wise, it doesn't feel like what you would normally come to expect from Wes Anderson, in my opinion. Overall, it's enjoyable, but by no means did it make an impact the way a lot of his other movies do? Because, usually you're impacted by what's happening on screen, and you're also impacted by what's happening to the characters. And I just don't feel like we get that second part as much as we normally do. I would say if I was going to rate this, I'd give this like a 7 out of 10. I'd give it a 7 out of 10. It's still, I mean, Wes Anderson is still a really good filmmaker. That's why I say, you, Wes Anderson, not because I hate him, but because I hate him. And so it's still a good movie, still definitely worth watching, still definitely worth really paying attention to and like actually consuming the movie rather than just observing the movie. So I would say 7 out of 10.
Okay. For me, this is pretty solid. I actually did enjoy the fact that this was an anthology, and I think if you look at it as an anthology, it's pretty good outside of the overall story being lackluster and having zero... I connected to it in zero ways because it's just used as a vehicle to give you the short stories, which on one hand is okay, but on the other hand, when your whole ending is taken up by wrapping up that part of it, and I don't care that one of your main characters has passed away, there's a problem there, and
yeah.
the fact that I can walk away with this thinking I liked this part and not, damn, that was a good film, again, is an issue for me. I think he went a little overboard on the whole aesthetic to almost to a point of the detriment of the writing. And I feel like has fallen into a trap, and maybe this is only in his own head. I don't know. He probably reads more of his critics than I do, but he's fallen into a trap, whether it's in his own head or not. That it kind of feels like, well, this is what is expected of me, therefore this is what I must produce, and it's getting stale, and it's getting to a point where I feel like I need something different from you. I need you to prove to me that you can make Bottle Rocket again, or Rushmore again, or something of that caliber that can retain his sensibilities, his filmmaking sensibilities, while at the same time being completely different than what he has done in the past. And this is definitely not that. This is what you expect from Wes Anderson, for better or worse. This is exactly what one would expect from Wes Anderson, while at the same time being completely lackluster on emotional depth and storytelling. So
that's why I said it feels very formulaic, and I think that's the best. I think that's the best way to describe this movie.
Yeah. He's figured out a formula that makes a Wes Anderson movie, and he went down the checklist and went, got this. Wes Anderson movie. And so for me, this is a 6 out of 10, which may be one of the lowest scores I've given his movies.
I never thought I would rate a Wes Anderson movie higher than
I know.
that.
Me neither. For real, me neither.
Never thought that would happen.
Now, with that being said, the visual storytelling in this movie is phenomenal. Every single second of this film could be a painting or could be a photograph. And that is what this movie does best, which, while can be entertaining, almost 2 full hours of nothing but visuals, being quirky visuals, is just not enough without the emotional depth of the story. The reason I like Wes Anderson movies is because he tells a lot of stories about family and a lot of stories about, like,
love and heart loss.
Yes, and not necessarily liking the people that you're around, but while simultaneously loving them and trying to figure out those complex emotions. And none of that is in here. None of it.
No.
So that's how I feel about that. So I think we're going to go ahead and wrap this up here. If you guys like this, make sure you hit the like button. If you really liked it, make sure you hit the subscribe button. Did you like this movie? Tell us what your thoughts were. Is this just a huge pretentious pile of crap, or did you love it? I'm genuinely interested to hear the thoughts of somebody that really loved this as a Wes Anderson movie, because for me, it was just a little bit lackluster. So,
So, put on those tweed jackets, light up a cigarette, and get to work in that comment section.
make sure you iron on the elbow patches first. Otherwise, you will look like a fool. So thank you guys for watching.
They come with those.
Oh, of course. Of course. So
if you go to Goodwill, they're already there.
Thanks for watching, and we'll see you guys next time from the deep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.